In the distance, the T-Rex roared like a man stubbing his toe on the coffee table after getting up to pee at night. Marsh Buckley's gut dropped, a jeep falling from a tree. Unlike a few unfortunate souls in their party, they'd scraped through the last encounter. Who knew toilets could be so dangerous? Marsh wrapped his arms around the kids' shoulders. Now, don't you worry, kiddos. I recognize that roar. I learned it in dinosaur school. What he's saying is, I am sufficiently full for the foreseeable future. I wouldn't even contemplate chowing down on a couple of children. The kids did not return his smile. Johnny Winteringham, the youngest, frowned up at him, disbelieving. The boy seemed to look right through his disguise. Bridget, meanwhile, continued to stare straight ahead with wide, unseeing eyes. She looked like a Vietnam vet suffering war flashbacks. Bridget moved, zombie-like, through the prehistoric undergrowth wherever Marsh and Johnny directed her. But she hadn't uttered a syllable since the Rex bit that poor chap in two whilst he was going number 2. Marsh chewed his lower lip. This dilemma was a tricky one. He'd gone from sharing a ride with them to becoming their guardian by proxy during the carnage. He'd even started to like them. And now, here they were, survivors one day later. They struggled with the previous day's events. What with all the dinosaurs and death? Marsh had gotten their bodies through it. But what would Grandpa say if he returned the kids in a dissociated state? No, Marsh had to get their minds through it too. He cast his thoughts back to his childhood, to try to recall how being a kid feels. What would have helped him? All he remembered was roughhousing and... that was it. The best way to help kids during traumatic events was to prank them and make them laugh. All would be well if the kids were chipper when they returned to the lodge. Marsh grinned as he pulled back the leathery fronds of a tree to make way for Bridget. Johnny guided her through the branches, pausing to wipe the spittle that had pooled on her chin. "Come on, this way, Bridge. You'll see that once we get back to the lodge, everything will be all right. Why, I'm sure Grandpa has already sellotaped that nice man back together." Marsh debated letting go of the branch and letting it swing back to swat the siblings right in their faces. That would be a laugh. But no, they were already banged up, with cuts, scrapes, and bruises adorning their bodies. He let the idea go instead of the branch. There had to be a funnier prank to lift their spirits. No physical pain. It wouldn't be proper at a time like this. But he had to do something before they returned, and he had to do it soon. If his calculations were correct, the lodge was beyond this hill. Marsh let the children pass and followed them, allowing the branch to swish behind him. They fought through the ancient foliage for a few more minutes before the trees opened onto a field. Johnny! In the lead? Froze in place, blocking the way. Oh. Marsh's fried nerves crackled. What now? He pushed past Bridget, rejecting the hilarious idea of shoving her into the bushes. He came up alongside the boy. What is... There stood a huge beast, but not of the Saurasian variety. The electric fences towered 24 feet high. The thick, metal posts had high tensile wires strung out between them. The gaps in the wires made the structure look like the skeleton of some mechanical dinosaur. The cold, utilitarian design contrasted with the surrounding green jungles. The air here held the lingering notes of ozone, which danced above the forest's perfumes. Marsh paused, mouth open, brow creased. He should have thought about this, but he hadn't. During the chaotic events, it had slipped his mind. Seeing that the fences failing had started this mess, he should have remembered them. Their tour of the park from the comfort of their jeeps had turned into a nightmare because of those damn fences. Why, the very image of the T-Rex, snapping his enclosure's cables, had seared itself right into Marsh's. Wait a second. Wait. The power for the electric fences had gone down during the storm. They posed no danger whatsoever. But, given little Johnny's reaction, the boy hadn't put two and two together yet. And Bridget was, at the moment, unable to tie her shoelaces. A plan began to form in Marsh's mind. A grin crept onto his face, and he fought to suppress it. "Okay," he said, "you kids wait here. I'm going to go check it out. If it's safe, I'll call you up." Bridget stared ahead, eyes glazed over, jaw slack like a cow chewing the cud. Johnny looked alarmed but didn't stop him. The boy only said, "Please be careful, Mr. Buckley." Marsh turned from the children and allowed the smirk to find its home on his face. Crouching, casting well-acted furtive glances from side to side, he approached the fences. "Oh man," he chuckled under his breath. "This is gonna be great." A black and red warning sign dangled from the fence. It read, "Danger 10,000 volts." Next to it was a symbol of a human hand with a lightning bolt passing through it. Marsh was so excited that his hair was prickling up. The humming chatter in his head grew in volume. He reached for one of the cables with two open hands. He glanced one final time over his shoulder. "Don't try this at home, kids." Johnny's eyes widened. He jumped forward, flapping his hand like a kid gone mad. "Wait!" But Marsh didn't. He was already getting into character to play the part of the electrocuted man. And so, Marsh made the final mistake of his life. He grabbed the wire in both fists instead of testing the fence with the back of his hand. In the background, Johnny continued to scream. "Lights still on! The light's still on!" Marsh gasped as his fleshy human frame completed the circuit. A freight train of electricity shot up his arms, burning his flesh and making his nerves scream. Every muscle in his body seized up, gluing him to the fence. His hands started to cook, melting like cheese on a burger. He tried to scream, but his chest muscles had tightened too much to let air escape. There was a loud snap, like God clicking his fingers, followed by a steady fizzing sound. Sparks jumped from the fence, offering sharp, staccato cracks of miniature lightning. Marsh wanted to let go, but he couldn't. The muscles in his hands had responded to the stimulation, locking him in a death grip with the fence. Shock immobilized him, scrambling his thoughts. Marsh shook, boogied, and jived as 10,000 volts raced through him. His hair caught fire. His eyes exploded like cherry bombs filled with red jelly. His heart beat its face against its cell bars until it had a black eye, a broken nose, missing teeth, and a concussion. His insides barbecued. Nearby, Johnny shrieked. Bridget, shocked out of her comatose state, joined him. The kids' screams harmonized, and, not too far away, the Rex joined with a lovely bass melody. The crackling of human skin offered a syncopated rhythm. Marsh whined as he fried. Here in the end, he realized there were times when jokes were inappropriate. And if you insisted on being a jokester despite the poor timing, you ought to expect a roasting. He struggled with every fiber of his being, which was now on fire, to let go. Marsh tried and failed. His muscles were too contracted to fight. The reek of burning hair and flesh overwhelmed the forest's floral aroma. Marsh's boiling fluids added an acrid odor. It was like overcooked pork mixed with an electrical fire at a wig factory. Marsh, who'd survived both T-Rexes and falling jeeps, died as the fence microwaved his brain into soup. Dear Judy, I'm writing to reintroduce myself. Maybe you got the wrong impression of me. I want to tell you everything I never got the chance to let you know. Because our lines never really crossed the way they were meant to. I hoped you'd always be a part of me. But you weren't. and that disappoints me more than you can know. I'm sorry. I was born on a farm in rural Missouri. There aren't a lot of people over there. My closest neighbor lived 2 miles away. I was homeschooled too, so I never interacted with many kids my age. I wouldn't have had time to hang out with them anyway. I always had work to do. There were animals that needed to be fed and crops that needed to be sowed. Things move in cycles on a farm. The corn grows during the summer so that you can harvest it at the beginning of September. No matter how many times you picked it, it always came back the next year. Seasons passed, and I watched the animals die out and have babies that would die out again. I envied them all. At least they had something to do and lives to live. It went on like that for years. So for years, I continued existing while never really being alive. The only relationship I had was with God. It was Him that led me to you. I know this because I prayed to Him. He would whisper in my ear, so only I could hear Him, and we shared this special friendship. I trusted His ways, and I did what He told me to do. Sometimes He would appear to me, Him and His angels from heaven. He would take the form of an animal and visit me while I was working. It happened when I was in the garden. His company let me know that He cared about me. So when a fire burned down all our harvest, I knew it was God's plan that we moved to California. It was His plan when my parents enrolled me in St. Paul High School. And it was His plan when He sat me next to you in class. I was lonely for a long time, until I met you. It was a very special thing for me when you asked me to go to the beach with you. It made me feel like I was more than just a placeholder man. I want to apologize for that first date. I know I'm not good at talking. I stumble over my words, and I can't ever look you in the eyes when I respond to you. I get nervous. People are endlessly judgmental. I always feel that I'm about to say the wrong thing to them. But you were different. You didn't do that to me. Not at the beginning, at least. When I took pauses to think about something else to say, or when I made a joke that you didn't think was funny, you forgave me. You showed me mercy when I asked you out again, and laid a kiss on your lips goodnight, promising you that I'd make you my wife before I left. So where did that mercy go when I tried to call you later that night? And where was it when you transferred out of my class? I felt like I lost a piece of myself. I'm nothing without you. I miss you. You gave me your company, which was more than anyone else gave me. You made me feel loved. I just want you to like me. Other people don't like me the way you do. That's why you're special. I want you to know that I liked you more than anyone else. My favorite. So why did you run away from me? Today, when I asked you to be mine, you know I'm crazy about you. And why did you give me so much of your time? When you know you wanted nothing to do with me? Why did you let me spend my money on experiences I never got to enjoy with you? You're a mystery, and it's fascinating. But that doesn't mean anything to you. I could die tomorrow, and you wouldn't care. You could be the name printed across my suicide note, and it would make you feel alive. Parasite. What you don't know is, I've been here before. I've poured my soul onto a person so that they can do with it what they will. I've spent the gem of my time in exchange for disappointment. But I'm learning. I reconsidered the things I've done, and I've realized where I went wrong. I always gave up too soon. You never know a good thing until it's gone. I hope you know that. So that's why I'm here. That's why I've bled ink on this page for you. I'm waiting for you. You'll go off and move forward, but remember that I'm waiting for you. I'm an idea sitting around the corners of your head. You can turn your back on me, but I'll always be there, hugging your skull. I'll keep my schedule open in case you call. And when I grow old and weak, my hope will remain strong. If you knock on your door, maybe I'll be on the other side. I believe in us. Do you? You're everything that I am. You think we're different, but we're really the same. I remember how you used to look at me. Where did that light go? I see flashes of it when I'm near you. When I try to talk to you while your friends are around, and you turn to snicker at them every time you respond to me. I know how I make you feel. If all my life is what I have to wait, I'll do it. It's just one of many. I'll save myself for you, so that when we die and our cold bodies return to the soil, our minds will live again. And again after that. We're immortal. So much so that even if you return this letter to the sender, I know I'll see you again. In the Garden of Eden. With love. Your other half. Present. The end. The sound of the murky water of the Tiber mingles with the cries of seagulls soaring above the shacks of Fiumara. Giacomo, the last descendant of the family, clutches the fob watch between his grease-stained fingers. It's an heirloom now out of place, with its chipped face and hands frozen at some random hour of a forgotten day. His hand trembles, not from cold, but from fear. Something moves in the shadows behind him. A shiver runs down his spine as he hears footsteps slowly approaching. His heart pounds in his chest, as if trying to break free. Giacomo grips the watch tighter, as if it could protect him from what is about to happen. The air suddenly becomes heavy, charged with a malignant energy that seems to suffocate all hope. The footsteps stop right behind him. Giacomo doesn't dare turn around, paralyzed by terror. A deep, raspy voice whispers in his ear, "The time has come to pay your family's debt, Giacomo." The icy words pierce his mind like sharp blades. The watch in his hand begins to vibrate, the hands moving backward with a sinister ticking. Giacomo feels himself being dragged into an abyss of darkness, from which there is no return. The cursed legacy of his family is about to claim its last victim. "You have to get rid of it," whispers a voice in his mind, or maybe it was the wind. Giacomo finds the courage to turn, looking at the shadows that seem to be taking shape. What? It's not the first time he's heard that whisper, and each time it's more insistent. The watch has haunted him for years. Dreams of faceless eyes, muffled screams, and the slow crumbling of everything he loved. With a desperate gesture, he heads towards a makeshift stall, a junk dealer with his gaze shrouded in cigarette smoke. "How much will you give me for this?" he asks, trying to mask his haste. The man observes him, intrigued, before nodding and holding out a crumpled bill. As Giacomo walks away, he realizes that the weight on his chest has lifted. But it's not just relief. It's as if a shadow has detached from him, an invisible thread cut. Behind him, the junk dealer raises the watch to the sunlight, the face reflecting an unnatural, almost hungry gleam. 1940s. The fall. World War II had brought ruin and despair to Giacomo's family. His grandfather Carlo kept the watch as an amulet against death. But the watch did not protect, it claimed. The night the air raid shelter collapsed, only Carlo survived. The watch was in his pocket, but the price of his life was high. His wife and children remained buried in the rubble. After that day, Carlo became a shadowy man, haunted by visions of hands trying to grab him from the shadows. He said the watch spoke to him, forcing him to do things he didn't want to do. One night, in desperation, he tried to throw it into the Tiber, but the next day he found it miraculously on his bedside table, intact. Carlo stared at the watch on the nightstand, terror gripping his throat. How could it have come back? He had thrown it in the river. He was sure of it. Yet, There it was, the face glowing with a sinister light in the dimness of the room. The hands moved backward, as if trying to take him back to that terrible night. Carlo closed his eyes, but the images assailed him anyway. The roar of the bombs, the desperate screams of his wife and children, the collapse of the shelter. And him, miraculously unharmed, with the watch clutched in his fist. "Why me?" he whispered, his voice broken with pain and guilt. "Why did I survive?" The watch seemed to answer him with a louder, almost mocking tick. Carlo felt a presence behind him, a shadow lengthening on the wall. He turned abruptly, but the room was empty. "You are the one who chose me," said a voice in his head. "Or maybe it's fate that chose you. It doesn't matter. Now you are mine." Carlo grabbed the watch, his hands shaking. He wanted to destroy it, shatter that cursed object that had taken everything from him. But he couldn't. Every time he tried, an invisible force blocked his arm. "You can't get rid of me," the voice continued. "I am part of you now, and you are part of me." In the following days, Carlo began to notice strange changes around him. People avoided him, as if they sensed something dark in him. Children cried as he passed. Even dogs barked furiously when he approached. The watch continued to whisper to him, showing him visions of a dark power he could attain. Carlo resisted, but he felt his will weaken day by day. One evening, while walking along the Tiber, he saw a young woman about to throw herself into the river. Without thinking, he ran towards her to stop her. But when he reached her, he pushed her down. 19th century, the rise. The family, then flourishing, owned a small antique shop. It was Carlo's ancestor, Marcello, who discovered the watch in a crate from a bankruptcy auction. The jewel seemed to bring good luck. Business prospered and Marcello became one of the richest men in Rome. But, with wealth, also came tragedy. His wife died under mysterious circumstances, and his eldest son went mad, claiming that the watch saw everything. Marcello ignored the signs, obsessed with his growing fortune. But his end was as sudden as his success. One night, the shop went up in flames. Among the ashes, only the watch was recovered, intact and still ticking. "How is it possible?" Marcello murmured, staring incredulously at the shiny face. It was then that he noticed that the hands were moving backward, ticking with an unnatural rhythm. And as he stared at them, he seemed to see reflected on the glass the images of all his past successes, but distorted, as if they were hiding a dark truth. He shuddered, remembering his son's words before he was taken away, screaming, "The watch sees everything, Father. It sees the past, the present, and the future, and it will condemn us all." Marcello clutched the watch to his chest, torn between the desire to throw it away and the irresistible attraction it exerted on him. It was at that moment that he heard a whisper, as if the watch itself was speaking to him. "Don't be afraid, Marcello," the voice said. "I am your fortune. I have given you everything and I can give you even more. You just have to trust me." Marcello hesitated, looking at the ruins of his shop. He had lost everything, but the watch promised to give him everything back and more. What did he have to lose? "What do I have to do?" he finally asked, feeling as if he was making a pact with the devil. The watch seemed to shine more intensely in the moonlight. "Listen to me," it whispered, "and I will show you secrets that no man has ever known." As Marcello nodded, accepting his fate, he did not notice the black shadow lengthening behind him. 5 feet on. Q. 18th century. The decline. The alley was shrouded in fog when the watch made its first appearance. It was a watchmaker from Piazza Navona, Niccolo, who built it for a corrupt cardinal. Niccolo was desperate, his family was starving, and he agreed to infuse the watch with a dark seal, a pact with forces he did not understand. When the cardinal died suddenly, the watch returned to Niccolò, beginning its long and bloody history in the family. Giuseppe stared at the recovered watch, his hands shaking. The face was still stained with the nobleman's blood, a sinister reminder of the dark power it possessed. "What are you?" he whispered, his voice hoarse with terror. As if in response, the hands of the watch began to move frantically backward. Giuseppe felt a shiver run down his spine as images of past events flashed through his mind. The nobleman dying, screaming, the watch mysteriously returning to his house, the whispers in the night that tormented him. Determined to rid himself of that cursed object once and for all, Giuseppe headed for the Tiber. The night was dark and silent, broken only by the gurgling of the river. With a desperate cry, he hurled the watch into the black water. For a moment, he stood motionless, his heart pounding in his chest. Then, slowly, a relieved smile spread across his face. It was over. He was free. But as he turned to leave, he heard a noise behind him. The river water bubbled as if something was emerging from the depths. With horror, Giuseppe saw the watch floating towards him, its hands spinning wildly. A voice, cold as death, whispered in his ear, "You cannot get rid of me, Giuseppe. We are bound for eternity." Giuseppe fell to his knees, overwhelmed by despair. He understood that the watch was not just a cursed object, but something much older and more powerful. An entity that had bound itself to his family, feeding on their lives and souls. As he picked up the watch, Giuseppe knew his fate was sealed. The watch would be passed down from generation to generation, carrying with it a curse that would haunt his family for centuries. With a resigned sigh, Giuseppe walked towards home, the watch clutched in his fist. The hands ticked relentlessly, marking the passage of time and the dark destiny that awaited his descendants. V. 16th century, the origin May. Niccolò trembled as he engraved the last occult symbols on the back of the watch. The candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls of his workshop. Outside, the fog thickened, isolating the alley from the rest of Rome. "It is done," he whispered, lifting the watch. The dial emanated an unnatural, malevolent light, and the hands moved with a sinister ticking that seemed to resonate within Niccolò's bones. "This watch will mark more than time, Niccolò. It will mark the fate of whoever possesses it." At that moment, someone knocked on the door. Niccolò jumped, hastily hiding the watch under a cloth. It was the cardinal's servant, who had come to collect the precious object. In the following days, Niccolò tried to forget the watch and the dark pact he had made. But at night, in his dreams, he saw hands turning backward and heard whispers of ancient and terrible voices. A week later, the news of the cardinal's sudden death shook Rome. And that same night, Niccolò found the watch on the doorstep of his shop, as if it had returned on its own. With trembling hands, Niccolò picked it up. The ticking seemed louder, almost triumphant. And as he stared at it, he thought he saw reflected on the dial images of future events. His family prospering, but also mysterious deaths and inexplicable tragedies. "What have I done?" murmured Niccolò, realizing that the watch was not just an object, but a living and hungry entity. An entity that had bound his fate, and that of his descendants, to itself. The watch ticked in response, sealing a pact that would last for centuries. Niccolò understood that he could no longer get rid of it. It was the beginning of a long and dark legacy that would haunt his family for generations. As the fog cleared outside the window, Niccolò clutched the watch to his chest, feeling the weight of his terrible secret. Vit Sprite, B. Epilogue. The Circle. A distinguished man approaches the antique shop, fascinated by the watch. He buys it without hesitation. When he holds it in his hands, the dial glows faintly. Now far away, Giacomo shudders, but does not turn around. Foolish mortals, do you think you can get rid of me so easily? I am the hidden shadow, the hunger that feeds on your souls. I observe my new owner, fascinated by my gleam. His fingers, unaware of the fate that awaits him, caress my dial. Soon, he too will know despair, terror, madness. Giacomo, the last of his line, believes he has broken the chain. Poor fool. He does not know that the bond that united us is stronger than blood, older than time. I have seen them all, one after another, succumb to my influence. I savor their hopes, their fears, their slow descent into the abyss. The greedy merchant, the superstitious, the guilty, each of them has helped to feed my darkness. And now a new cycle begins. The hands turn, time flows, and I wait patiently. No matter how far they run, how deeply they try to hide, I will find them, always. Because I am the clock, and they are mine. For eternity. I wouldn't have done it had she stayed of her own volition. Her legs don't quite fit, and she lies crumpled like a rag doll. Her torso in the suitcase, her limbs hanging out like the petals of a flower opening at daybreak. I learned about nyctinisty on a walk home from high school once. I'd thought flowers were forever open once bloomed. Nope, said my classmate. I was wrong. Anyway, that's beside the point. Gorgeous she is, even in this state. Odd, though, to see Nora so weak. To have felt her wriggling beneath my grip like a fly buzzing wildly on a sticky trap, its wings superfluously and pathetically ambitious. Eyes bulbous and bulging, watching me. 2 microphones demanding I speak. You're my life, I said. She shouldn't have packed. I mean, she said she loved me. You don't tell someone you love them and then abandon them. I love you. But I love myself more, she said. The world's sick, it is. Insatiable. You've got a man who loves you, a future, and you throw it all away in the name of freedom. You throw it all away so you can lug a hideous blue suitcase across the world. Freedom. It doesn't click like a broken wheel or reek of a t-shirt worn for 3 consecutive days. It doesn't mean discarding everything so that life weighs a sickly 23 kg. Who fed her these illusions and convinced her that a plane ticket was anything more than a flimsy bit of paper? More than old bricks and canvases and disenchantment? Been there, done that. If my angel, oh, her rosy cheeks and wide eyes, wants to be mugged beside an ancient fountain, am I wrong to put my foot down? Am I supposed to watch her wander into the world and be manipulated by smiling people who compliment her eyes and offer her twigs of rosemary? I love her, and love means protecting those dear to you. And I didn't plan it, you know. It was just a thought. I had no intention of feeding. Yeast without sugar, fungi without moisture. When I bought the respirator off eBay, I didn't think I'd actually need it. Hence the pink kitchen gloves. I peeled them off my hands and draped them over her computer chair. Had I planned any of this, I'd have been better prepared. I'd have had the proper equipment. I wouldn't have to sit here on the edge of her bed, staring at the wardrobe and its broken knobs. She'd hidden inside, you see. A stupid hiding place. Tried tying the handles together with her scarves, I think, but they hang there uselessly like the insides of a slaughtered pig. Fear registered on her expression as I opened the wardrobe doors. Fear of me. That was aggravating. You know, after everything. Sorry, I've been zoning out. Funny that. I rise and tuck myself into bed. Beneath her Egyptian cotton sheets, 500 thread count. Birthday present from yours truly. I cuddle Xiao Yu, one of her plushies. His tail fin hangs by a thread, and his big vacant fisheye stares through me. I open the drawer of Nora's nightstand and fish her sewing kit from amongst the condoms, which I count just to be sure, the batteries and loose sheets of paper. I stare into the eye of the needle, and it stares back. I lick the frayed blue thread. Why'd Nora go and ruin everything? Stupid she looks, hanging out that suitcase. Hair splayed like a drowning woman. She loved that word. I just feel suffocated, she'd say, like I'm drowning. Drowning, drowning, always drowning. I love you. Drowning. I miss you. Drowning. Marry me. Drowning. This is the first time I've ever hit a woman, besides my sister, but that doesn't count. I panicked, I think, because it took longer than expected. The thrashing, the struggle, it's never portrayed in cinema. Maybe because they're not instructions. And she put up quite the fight, the bitch. She even held her breath when she caught a sweet whiff of it. And that was just as aggravating. Her knowledgeability, her resourcefulness, and her resistance. But Nora, her thoughts are whimsical and ungrounded. She's a loose kite, and the winds, they aren't kind. She needs an anchor. She needs me. I mean, she described herself as a cloud once. Lunatic she is, when she isn't rational and intelligent and thoughtful, because she can be all those too. Floating above sometimes. Floating around and going wherever the wind takes her. Nonsense. Beautiful, though, her delusional conviction in the airy-fairy weightlessness of being. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with her, actually. She pulled a sword from my stone heart, which I hadn't even known was there, besides the mild throbbing somewhere in my past. It was a splinter absorbed and integrated into my being, my soul. There was nothing large enough to hurt me. Negligible. A mere thorn. Nothing large enough to hurt me until her. Fear in her eyes, God damn it. Fear of me. Oh, my little dandelion. Lips carved so beautifully. Porcelain skin. I put down Xiao Yu, put down the needle, and approach my unconscious darling, her pink lids like plum blossoms. Eyelashes so long, tips bleached blonde by the sun. Sweet little thing trying to abandon me. Silly, she is. She doesn't know what she wants, or that the monster beneath her bed lurks in the great unknown. That it isn't safe, not for her. Not for her in her skin-tight jeans and flimsy tank top. Way. I twiddle a spaghetti strap between my thumb and forefinger, pull it down over her shoulder. Bare die. How easily it slipped right off, you see. And how white her skin, freckles like a sprinkling of chocolate dust over milk foam. But her poor cheek, it carries the red sting of my palm. That'll bruise, I think. What will we tell her mother? And no, I didn't knock her out. It was the chloroform, eventually. I don't know why I write this knowing I'll be misunderstood by those who know less. Like vultures you are, ripping me apart before knowing the entire story. Before knowing that this woman, the love of my life, decided to abandon me. Herself, and our future. The future we planned, was it just a girl's fairy tale written in glitter ink, meant to be lost and forgotten? Dug up again in decades in some old notebook, the subject of a nostalgic smile, a derisive snort and headshake. Oh, sweet naivete. Silly but sweet naivete. But these were my life plans, the plans of a grown man with both his feet on the ground, and its mud, its moisture, its sad patches of faded green. It was real for me. And what was that sparkle in her eyes? More than a fool's parched hallucination. It was. And oh, how her body melted into mine, as hot as candle wax, when we merged. I can't have imagined it. If only she knew that this is life. Life isn't a sickly 23 gonka. I tie a tiny blue knot and tug at Xiao Yu's tail. All better. Tuck him into bed. I pick up Nora's clothes strewn around the bedroom. Rip them from her suitcase I did. Wrong of me, I know. I've always been short-tempered. I open her wardrobe, empty, bare coat hangers like teeth in the great yawning skull. I put her shirts back on hangers and into the wardrobe. Staying she is. My stomach turns at the thought of her on that plane, of the gaping absence she'd have left behind. Empty drawers, an empty wardrobe, empty cafes, and empty afternoons, empty side of the bed, empty dining table chair, empty Sunday mornings, and empty crosswords. I reel at the thought of the echo. Thank goodness she's here. Right here, breathing. Just the pulse of her heart in me. I drop a shirt, drop to my knees. Oh, I hold her limp hand in mine. Warm it is. Bitten fingernails. I kiss them one by one like bruises. I recoil, shame, at the bruise yet to form on her round cheek, plump like that of a child. I wouldn't have done it, had she understood. If only she'd stop, breathe. Clothes on coat hangers. Manageable, doable. One sleeve, two sleeves. I hang up a summer dress. Black, red, roses, glock. A little bow on the chest. Can't help but shake my head imagining her wearing it with someone else. Can you blame me? I can't forgive abandonment. And all this reeks of it. Her toiletries bag. Mini bottles of shampoo and soap. Planned. All planned. The room, half empty. Unlived in, it seems. I hang another summer dress. Into the wardrobe it goes, never to see the sun of Italy or the bustle of its cafes. Never to know its espressos or buongiornos or the Vespa of a bearded brunette with dark brows and olive skin. Call me jealous, but... Oh, she groans. Respirator back on. Apocalyptic it looks. I slide back into the pink kitchen gloves and peel back the Tupperware lid. I approach my beloved, her angel eyelids, her pouted lips, and press the cloth against her nose again. Too long? Not long enough? I won't ever do it again, I swear. Except if I do the proper research perhaps and take the necessary precautions. Quite cute she is, lying there. Almost like a doll. Others have said so too. Prettiest girlfriend I've ever had. Doe-eyed, freckled and inclined to blush. Oh God, do I love it when she does. But I could pull out my own teeth at the thought of her blushing at another man. So lovely she is. If I could fit her into the suitcase, you could very well pop her on a shelf in the nearest toy store. If the suitcase were transparent, that is. But why is she in the suitcase, you might ask? It slipped my mind to explain, you see. Sometimes I get carried away, and I might be slightly dizzy. I thought I might fold her up inside and take her home with me. Everything would be easier at home. Just a matter of efficiency, and I don't want her neighbors to see us like this. Sticky beaks they are. Knocked on her door the day I punched the china cabinet. I still hear it. The shatter, silence, footsteps knocking. Anyway, you might guess that Nora didn't fit. My tiny little dandelion was too big. I couldn't fold her into the suitcase, hence her silly limbs. I don't know what I was thinking. Sometimes she's so small in my head that I could fold her like a pocket square and tuck her into my coat. How old were you, by the way, When you learned that dandelions become dandelion clocks, that those beautiful yellow petals turn into fluff and float away? Nora will thank me when she understands. I check my watch. Her flight leaves in 30 minutes. She'll have missed it by the time she awakes again. And maybe I'll know exactly what to say to appeal to her whimsical logic. You always have to reframe things with her, you see. She doesn't get it. She doesn't know what's best or realistic or grounded. She's a circus tent. You must drive stakes into the ground around her and tie her down, or else she'll fly away. She doesn't know any better, though. I can't fault her for being hopeful. Harder, still, when she's so pretty. Chubby pink cheeks. Cherubic ... Baby hairs frame her face. Cupid's bow so defined, so sweet. Contoured like a deep valley. Oh, if I could flow through it like a stream. I climb back into bed with Xiao Yu-Di. We won him at a carnival, hook a duck. Merry-go-round music, fairy lights, peals of laughter, Nora's gap-toothed smile. Juvenile, almost. And now there she lies, limp and ridiculous. I remember when she said she loved me and began to cry. She cried once too, while we were making love. How did she go from loving so deeply to this? I feel not endearment, nor pity, nor regret when I look at her like this, folded up all clumsy like a sock puppet with button eyes. What I feel is disgust. Betrayal, it was. Buying that ticket. Betrayal, that mini shampoo. No other name will do. No other costume or disguise. And I ache for the past. It's not unrealistic, not a dream, not a fantasy. I ache for the past because it existed. I have had it, and I've known it. I know what it was like to have her staring at me starry-eyed, to have her in the palm of my hand. And I ache for it again. I ache for what it was before it was. This. As I recall her betrayal, her face warps before my eyes into that of a stranger's, like a name repeated until it loses all meaning. I avert my eyes from the suitcase and its unfamiliar inhabitant. I ache for that grubby, chubby caterpillar I knew and loved. Oh, should I have pinned her emerging wings to a block of styrofoam? Hey God! CNN just announced we have about 6 months before we're cooked. The sun's getting hotter by the day. I can't go outside anymore. I thought we had like a billion-ish years left? At least, that's what the Science Museum exhibit said when I went as a kid. Scared the hell out of me, always has. But a billion years is a damn long time. 6 months is absolutely not. I would love it if you could make the sun go back to normal. I haven't done everything I wanted to do yet. Please. It's too hot. It hurts. My skin is... Please. More sincerely than I've ever been about anything. Ever. Alice Kincaid. Scowling, Ron called Deity. The line rang for a few long moments, but he was pleasantly surprised when the CEO answered. Hello? Hi. Dee, how's it going? Hey, man. Same old? What's up? I just had a question about Salvation RFPs. Ron could hear Deity typing something as he responded blandly. Shoot. Are you guys doing anything about M? I forwarded several to you and the board, but they just keep coming. I was going to mark them as spam, and wanted to check if you're receiving them without me forwarding. Yeah. Spam M. Got it. Ron considered whether it was professional to ask further questions, but his curiosity outweighed his propriety. Are you going to respond to them? Take any of Earth's projects on, I mean. Deity laughed in an offhand way. Nah, I'm phasing out the planet. Humans are too destructive. Tarsanus's Jebulons have their act together a lot better. So the board voted to sell off Earth and invest over there instead. It's a stabler market. He felt a hot stab of dismay at the news and swallowed thickly. Understandable. But can I say, he gave a little laugh. I mean, I know it's way above my pay grade, but... Ron chose his words carefully as he said, humans have been our top client for a few 100,000 years. They've had some centuries of poor performance every now and then, sure, but we've always kept an overall, mutually beneficial relationship. It's unfortunate we're ending it on a bad note. Deity clicked his tongue. Speak more freely, Ron. I don't mind hearing your opinion. Ron huffed a chuckle. Don't write them off our books. I like what they put out. Would be a shame to not be able to get their stuff anymore. What sort of stuff? Ron thought for a moment. Well, I enjoy all the love stories. They've got some great food, too. I tried a sandwich once. Phenomenal. And I owe them a debt for coming up with calendars. Deity deliberated silently before replying. Jebulon's just created a far superior timekeeping system, and it didn't take them almost 300,000 years to do it. Switch to using theirs. The market's moving on. Ron, progress with it. I appreciate your input, though. Tell you what, I'll bring up your notes to the board at the next meeting. Ron's shoulders relaxed. Thanks, Dee. Appreciate it. Yep. Have a good one. The line went dead. Ron turned his attention back to Alice's message, his cursor hovering over the mark as spam button. He decided to archive it instead. Why? Ron brooded the entire commute home and concluded that he found the DMV's culture and overall philanthropic approach to be increasingly lackluster. Phasing out Earth was a bad move, plain and simple. He didn't understand the decision, even after hearing Deity's explanation. Jebulons had exited the primitive stage of existence far quicker than humans had, true, but their demeanor was overzealous. The DMV's mailroom was constantly overwhelmed with fanatic offerings, and their adoration always felt just a tad too desperate to be authentic. Humans showed their appreciation for reality in subtler ways. They were intentional with it, more honest. A message of gratitude at receiving a tight embrace from a missed loved one. A whispered "I owe you" when swimming through crystal water. A salute when a sore knot is worked out of a long aching muscle. Deity was a great guy, a fantastic CEO, but he had a distinct flair for the dramatic that often left Ron dealing with a nightmare at the office. For instance, around 6,000 years ago, Deity hedged a bet that chemistry wouldn't be able to synthesize enough water for Q3 on their current budget, so he'd ordered Ron to increase their payment. Mike had warned the CEO that doing so would generate far more water than could be tolerated by planets with life forms, but Deity had simply responded that those life forms were underperforming. He ordered that a handful of profitable creatures be retained for improved reproduction, and the task fell to Ron to proceed with the higher payment. To this day, Ron felt terrible about flooding every planet across 4 galaxies. He settled into his nightly routine, but he couldn't get Alice's message out of his mind. He pulled up the archived message as he ate his supper. After a stiff drink, he forwarded the correspondence to his personal account, then forwarded it to Alice again with an attached reply. Ron winced, pulled out his phone and found Alice's alternate contact in the DMV database. He dialed the number for a video call. The image of a hyperventilating woman curled into the fetal position on a dirty floor appeared on the screen. She was covered in patches of charred skin, and her hair was matted with blood in some places. "Ah, hello, this is Ron. Please forgive me for calling you at this hour and for the pain you experienced receiving my initial messages. I wasn't aware my previous form of communication would be painful for a human. She let out a shriek upon seeing him appear in what looked to be her kitchen. Her hands tore at her hair as she mumbled incoherently, "Are you all right? It wasn't my intention to startle you." Alice shot to her feet and tugged a large chopping knife from its holder, brandishing it in his face. "Who? What are you?" Ron's brow furrowed. He'd always assumed humans would recognize a DMV agent, considering all the mail they sent. As I said in my earlier message, I'm the... What the hell? Manager of accounts payable at the DMV. He continued, as she panted a string of vile curses. I read your RFP meant for the Savior Department, and I felt just awful about what's happening to your son. I thought I'd give you an update personally, maybe alleviate your fears a bit. Her subsequent screech was nearly unintelligible, but Ron deduced through the wailed expletives that she was confused about the nature of the DMV. Please, miss, calm yourself. I'm not technically in the room with you. Alice's eyes bulged, but she stilled, and the knife clattered against the tile floor. The division is quite hard to explain to a life form on your plane of existence, but the short answer is that we manage and regulate that plane. She jabbed a finger in his direction. So, you're the one responsible for making the sun about to explode. Ron's teeth tugged at his bottom lip. It's a bit more complicated than that. He lost the battle against his better judgment and gave the terrified woman a simplified explanation of Deity's decision. When he finished, she sank to the floor in a heap and put her filthy head in her hands. It will be all right. The board will. Alice breathed a raw laugh. Ron looked at her with concern as the sound grew in broken intensity. Miss! Angels! She choked out between gasping fits of laughter. And God and reality itself are all just a bunch of corporate goons. And I'm nothing more than an underwhelming employee. And her laughter morphed into weep. Oh, that is cruel. She was an underwhelming client, technically, but Ron didn't correct her. Is there anything more I can do to help you at the moment? He cringed at the utter devastation on the woman's face as she turned to nod at him. She was silent for a long moment, staring blankly at the heat-yellowed paint of the wall, before she muttered, "Take me back to that museum, all those years ago, so I can tell my 10-year-old self to write a lot of books, to read a lot more of them, to learn the guitar, to become a rock star, like I always wanted, or maybe an author. To become a rock star." Her voice broke as she slowly stood back up. To hurry up and find the love of my life, because I've spent it entirely alone. To quit my soul-sucking office job, or to not even take it in the first place. To hug my mom long and hard every chance I get. To tell my dad I forgive him. To make peace right then and there with how insignificant I am because I am. Ron ground his teeth at the volume of her final sentence, shocked at how viscerally uncomfortable the word insignificant made him feel. I'll be sure to speak to Deity tomorrow at... Alice threw the knife with all her strength at his projection, ending the call. Wait. I'm sorry, Ron, I am, but there's nothing I can do. We don't undo what's already been done. Chris, the head honcho over at Time, was being irksomely dense. Ron grumbled, gesticulating at the big machine before them. I know that. Nothing needs to be undone. Just done over again. Run Earth's clock backward a bit, only 20 years. Come on, I'll owe you one. Memories on board. They already primed the wood. Chris ran a hand through his silvering hair. Deity approved this? Not as such. Sure did. For one human woman? Consider it an experiment. You've ran back time before for far duller reasons. I don't know if I'd consider what we needed done with that woman in the Chaplin film to be. Ron waved a dismissive hand. Chris, seriously. The time boss rolled his eyes. Fine. Who, when, and where am I sending her? Ron explained Alice's plight, and Chris pushed various buttons on the machine. Just send back her present consciousness into her childhood self. That's it. You do realize that this might kill the woman? We've never reversed memory back into time before. He shrugged and scratched his nose, looking at a sleeping Alice on the screen in front of them. It's an experiment. Chris nodded, then cranked a few more dials. Adult Alice didn't move, but the child Alice on the adjacent screen. Ron cringed as the child screamed and screamed and screamed. Chris sucked in air through his teeth. Child Alice drew frightened looks from the other science museum patrons, until finally being subdued by her mother. Ron scratched his temple, chewed the inside of his cheek. The girl screeched over and over again in her mother's arms. What's the point? Chris shut the machine off, locking adult Alice into her child body forever, or at least until the sun exploded. He clapped Ron on the shoulder. Call that a success? Ron was silent for a beat, then muttered, Seems like the quick death of the sun might be preferable to the existential crisis brought on by simply thinking about the slow death of it. Think she'll appreciate her life more this time around? Dunno. Sun's still going to explode on schedule. Board's not budging on it. He sighed. No one will remember her, in the end, even if she does make something out of her life. Or maybe they will for a little while, now that she can change some things. That's all most of us can hope for, really. To not be insignificant. To do something important with our lives. He shot a triumphant smile at Chris, feeling overall very pleased with himself. At least he was able to do this. Change this small thing to help such a lovely planet. Chris shot him a confused look. Oh no, she can't change anything, man. She did all this screaming the first time around when she learned the sun was going to explode in 1 billion years, too. I told you, nothing can be undone. But she will be able to watch it happen all over again, with her adult memories and reasoning. Maybe she'll just learn to be great. Ron paled, his grin evaporating. The time boss stretched his arms and cracked his back, and didn't notice the color drain from Ron's face. Anyway, let's get lunch. You're buying. Same with my best friend. My best friend in the whole world. They made him, and they left him alone to die, with as much scientific rigor and candor as they'd fill a mouse with Ebola, and watch it squirm and seethe on the inside, till it bursts, or at least watch till they get bored. See there? He's yonder. That sinewy tree thing. That thing on the hill. Yeah, you see it. You see its faces. Let's walk there. I'll show you. I don't know how they did it. Genetic manipulation. Don't call whizzes for nothing. I never heard much of what it was till the months coming up till his death. All bits and pieces he'd recount between hacking sobs and draughts of liquor. Such guilt over nothing. Nothing his fault. And them scientists who were at fault didn't give a damn. If I'd had the cash to give my friend to go to therapy, even if it was every last penny I had, I'd have given him it all to go. To help him any last bit. Hate myself that I didn't. All I did was fill him up with more liquor, lend him an ear. Thought that was enough. Then, what was I saying? Ah, right. See, David Castro was a plant. I'm serious, asshole. Look. See the face? That's him. I got a picture on my phone. Look. Now, shut up and listen. I don't know what the hell they did to make him. I can only describe it like a Wikipedia page of it all learned at secondhand. The actual chemical shit I don't know. Far as he told me, they took a species of tree from Yemen with the exact same number of genomes as humans. They said to themselves, hey, why not modify each gene a stem cell of this plant and make them exact replicas of human genes? And why not do creative? Sick in the head, but creative. David never owned up to them being sick in the head. But he's all done and gone. I'm the judge here and now, and they were sick in the head. The experiment proposal passed through the ethics board with fanfare. Same fucks who let that AI child get made. This is all for the child killed itself course. Herself? See, you're doing the same thing they did. They did it. They made a viable egg cell and sperm, each and a viable, ovule? Same difference. Genetic clones, twins of one another, just with all the letters switched around. One of the scientists on the team who did it, Maria, she took the quasi-human embryo and put it in her own womb. And then she planted the tree in her backyard. Big backyard, I remember they had, went there a few times. She was a real superstar, see, worked on sexual genetics, and got a whole bunch of prizes for it. Bought herself a big house and let her husband and Dave live there. Now, the tree was just sitting in the corner of the yard. Weird-looking thing. Small and twisted. Didn't grow much. Sat there years and years without anyone much noticing but her, course. She loved that thing much more than she loved David, or her pathetic husband Jan, for that matter. If she could even love a human being. Called it Cesar. Watered the thing and fertilized it and cooed over it. Maria was just always a cold bitch, and Jan a pathetic cuckold. And I don't use either word lightly. They were unloving and neglectful as they come, in that bourgeois, over-rational, unemotional dominatrix and her loserly sub kinda way. Never said they loved him. Made him study. For what? God knows. That's why David loved my family. See, we lived on the poor side of the block. I met him right on the corner that was the borderline between rich and poor, at the then new playground there. 9 years old, we both were. Shrimpy-looking thing, or so he seemed. Still remember it, clear as day. I was showing off my highly misled and definitely misplaced machismo to some galley I don't recall. She was all google-eyed towards him, and not me, right? So I challenged him to a wrestle. God, Shrimp was a lobster. He had me pinned and squealing and laughing, 'cause it was so funny how a tiny guy like him could overturn me like that. I said sorry, told Amy one fair and square. We forgot the gal, and we went, and he bought us both them colored ice pops from the truck, back when they still did that kind of thing. I invited him back to my house, and once the bruises and cuts got explained away with concrete. Mother and father. Ooh, that's a sign if any of a kid going unloved. Mom called his house, asked if he could stay. And his mother had said, that's fine. He makes his own food, anyway. God. Bad omen, there ever was any. I hate that woman. I hate her. David ended up practically growing up at our place. We'd hit the bus stop together, go to school, come back, and he'd stay for dinner and just go home to study, sleep, and eat breakfast. Whole childhood spent like that, and I think it's the best we could do for him. Kept him out of that barren house much as we could. We loved him as much as his mother didn't. But Dave was normal. Beer swilling, acid dropping, weed smoking, normal ass fellow diet. Didn't have no trouble with nobody, not even his own parents, much as they deserve trouble. I had to help him open up to others, sure. Being stuck with a lady and her dog like that for so long, and you'd be quiet too. But he was a friendly man. Lovely man, in spite of the efforts of his mother dog. It's just that, one day when we were back home, he drifts into my room, pale and shivering like a leaf. Bad way of putting it. He was right scared, looked about ready to hurl at any second. I asked him, "What's wrong, Davil?" He just came out the gate swinging. "I'm not human." What? I certainly felt that kinda sentiment for myself before. Not that I ever believed it for one sec. I mean, we all feel that way sometimes, or some of the more aware of us do. What you mean, though? He brought out papers from his bag. I couldn't make heads nor tails of M.A., but he went and pointed out all the important parts. He spoke creakily. "Right here, says the scientists made a human ovum out of the stem cells of a Yemenese blood tree, a rare subspecies of the dragon's blood tree, by manually converting the plant's genes to resemble human ones. Since they both share the same number of chromosomes, and Esquivel V and Castro, M.L. provoke transition and transformation between animal and plant cells. T. Castro, M. Maria Castro, your mother. So what the hell's all that mean? They made two viable embryos, a human child and a seed. I'm that child, made from the tree." I didn't know what to say. I almost laughed, had it not been the look like death upon his face. He said after a while, Things are making sense now. I'm not my parents' kid. I'm not a human being." I asked him how, but he just shrugged and left. Didn't see him till a week and a half later, and he was still the same. I was a heavy drinker myself at the time, for my own reasons, and I just let him join in, to soothe his spirits. And it did for some time. But all I ended up doing in the end was make him worse. He failed school, by the way. Just completely broke down. He started locking his door at school to me, to everyone. Said he felt bad. All the time. Like my joints are stiffening up, he'd said. I would go to knock on his door every day, just to let him know that someone cared. Some days he'd ask me for a fifth or a blunt, and I'd give M to him. Shouldn't have, but I was a stupid kid. This was caring to me. But then he stopped letting me in at all. Stopped answering my knocks. Got scared out of my mind. One time thought he might have drunken himself to death, or overdosed. Called and shouted and pounded on his door. No, turns out he just left for home halfway through the semester. Not so fortunately. It was only later when I found out exactly why. I was driving by the woods over yonder one time, and I saw M. Half-wrenched my neck when I snapped my head back to make sure I weren't crazy. In a grove of great old oaks. Hadn't seen the man for months at that point. Whenever I went to Maria's house, she just always said with her trademark smug frown, "He's not here." But they were there, together, in the grove, dancing mad and naked. His mother Maria was dancing and yelping like a rag doll on strings, as Dave stood in the middle of the grove like a statue. I didn't stop right away. I shoulda. But I turned around after I'd driven already 30 seconds away. And when I got back to where I'd seen they were gone. Even went into the grove itself and found nary a footstep in the grass. I dunno what I saw. So the day after I went and confronted M, I'd riled myself up into a frenzy by then. I was confused and saddened and scared out of my mind, and I wanted to know just what in all hells was going on. I caught them at the right time. Just as Maria grimly opened the door, I saw his fleeting shape in the hallway. "Dave, get your ass out here. I need to speak with you." She just shrugged, casually dropped the door, and left Dave to catch it. Dave looked wizened down to half nothing, paler and thinner than ever before. Something was wrong with his skin, on his limbs, on his face, like he'd been scratching at it endlessly. I could only stare at him. "Dave, what the hell is going on? I'm affrighted for you. Mom and Dad are affrighted for you. You lock yourself away and say nothing, and I didn't say what I'd seen, for I looked him deep in the eyes, and they were red and wild. It's natural for me. God damn it, isn't. Shh. Keep your voice down. No, man, it's true. I'm a sessile organism. I'm becoming my true self. That's what Mom said. The fuck's that got to do with anything? And she ain't your mom, you said that yourself. That stang in, and that stinging face of his hurt me right back. Suddenly, though, he got serious. I've been having dreams, man. Dreams of that tree in the backyard, coming closer, taunting me, telling me I stole his place, that I was born wrong. And it's been creeping towards me, peeking through my window to remind me whose bed is whose. And he is right. Mama's right. I am what I've always been, on the inside. Yeah? And when did always begin? He didn't answer me. He simply stared at me and slowly shut the door. Never saw him alive after that. It was a cold harvest night when it happened. Screaming out in those woods. My family thought it was coyotes out yelping, but something put me mightily on edge. The call was alone, and something to it had an uncanny tinge, a gross familiarity that I could not, dared not, place. The Father John reported Dave missing. After a week, search party went out to find him. With M. I told EM I had a bad hunch. Led them to the Oaks Grove, where I'd seen the bitch dancing around M. And there he was. Not even in the middle. Just among the trees. Strung up like Christ on a crossbeam. Pieces of bark hammered into his skin and bone, his skull. Cut and flayed in venous pathways to look like that bastard tree that haunted Ian. Covered in flesh-carven eyes. Didn't see her at the funeral. Didn't see her ever again after that. Coward. I'd kill her if I ever get a glimpse of her. I would. Wouldn't never be enough, though. But it'd feel damn good. There were only a few of those scientists at the wake, even fewer at the funeral. One of them cried at seeing the body. The rest had already done their tests and were just staying as a perfunctory. And the only ones that even looked at his body did it like they were checking out a pinned insect. I asked a few of them if they even knew him. I know his mother. They'd answer. Buried his ashes atop that hill in this here churchyard. You go up there, and it overlooks the old playground we used to play at. My dad damn near had to fight him into it. He'd gone to Maria's house and followed a stubborn cuckold in. He left, and a quivering ball of slime followed him to make sure he was out. Dunno what he did, but it put fear in that slime's lukewarm heart. Artful. But David's ashes are buried up there. That tree weren't there before, though. The blood tree'd long already dwarfed Mariah's house. Anyone could see it, anywhere on the street. Ask anyone down there, they all remember. One day, a few weeks after he was buried, me and my family all woke up to a crowd outside, all pointing and shouting. See, it wasn't there. You can still see the deep blasted and rotted pit where it once stood, a deep dragging line full of torn-up, bleeding, pus-filled roots. It had moved. A 2-ton tree climbed up atop the hill. A monstrous, venous, bloody apparition overshadowing our world. We fucked up. We should have scattered Dave's ashes in a sea, where his twin can't ever get to in. 'Cause I think I damned in. I did. I always did. I didn't help, and not really. This son of a bitch, the tree Maria had lovingly named Cesar, has eaten David's soul. I'm sure of it. I've damned him to worse than hell. See here? Dave's agonized, obscured face, almost swallowed by the tree. He can't see us. And this one? That twisted, uncanny one of orgasmic ecstasy? That's him. He can. Doran had never traveled beyond the village before, and as he stood at the edge of the narrow dirt track winding into the distant hills, he was filled with anticipation of the journey ahead. The two sheep, destined for market in the neighboring village, tugged gently at their ropes, and Doran felt a swell of pride at the responsibility his father had bestowed on him with this important task. But his mother's parting words had instilled a lingering sense of trepidation in the young man. Stay on the path. She'd warned him that morning, her voice firm as she adjusted the satchel slung across his chest. No matter what you see, no matter what you hear, don't stray from the path. And above all, don't set foot in the forest. She'd said it with such intensity, fearful almost. But when Doran asked her why, she'd simply looked at him blankly and said nothing more. The rays of the late September sun warmed Doran's back as he and the sheep headed west along the well-worn trail following the river through the hills. Doran's mind was absorbed in his mission, visualizing the market where he was to sell the sheep, and the return journey, reaching home before sunset, to please his parents and set his mother's mind at ease. At least the walk home will be easier without them, he thought as the willful sheep pulled at their ropes, tempted by the tufts of grass dotted along the sides of the path. Doran had been walking for over 2 hours. The sun was climbing a low arc in the southern sky, and he rested on a bank of heather to drink from his flask and eat some bread and cheese from his satchel. He tied the two sheep to a small ash tree and lay back on the springy purple heather, watching the strange shapes in the clouds where dragons and other great creatures battled against the blue. Doran closed his eyes for a moment, the sun warm on his face, but his reverie was cut short as the sound of urgent bleating forced him up with a jolt. He looked around. There was one of the sheep, tied to the ash, but the other was nowhere to be seen. Panic grabbed him. He took a hold of the remaining sheep's rope and began to call for the other animal, searching left and right, down into the river, but there was no sign of the missing creature. The trees beyond the bank of heather rustled in a slight breeze that was edging its way into the valley, and with no alternative, Doran clambered the banking to the forest's edge, where instantly he spotted a tuft of wool caught on the gnarled trunk of a great oak tree. He stepped towards it. The narrow path between the densely packed trees was barely visible beneath a blanket of fallen leaves and foliage, and as Doran led the remaining sheep, hoping to quickly locate the missing one, he sensed a heaviness in the air, thick with spores. It seemed to press down on him, as though the forest was alive and watching. Strange fungi that Doran had never seen before clung to the roots of the trees, while sinuous branches twisted together above his head, blocking out the sunlight. Something hidden stirred with his every step, murmurs and whispers, beckoning him further into the forest, and Doran continued his search into the depths of the rustling trees. "Come on," Doran whispered, tugging the rope as the remaining sheep hesitated, digging its hooves into the soft forest floor. Despairingly, he looked around in every direction. "I've failed already," he thought. "Not even made it to the market. What will I tell mother and father?" Then his eyes fell on a holly bush on the path ahead, and another tuft of wool. He yanked at the rope, and the sheep begrudgingly followed, onward, and soon they were so far into the heart of the forest that when he glanced back, onwards he went with a strange compulsion to keep moving forward. But finding the missing sheep was slowly becoming less of a reality, and Doran wondered how he could go to the market with just one sheep and somehow reverse his bad fortune. Perhaps I can find a way of working for some money at the market, he thought. Then Mother and Father will never know that I lost the sheep. The naive idea began to form in the corners of Doran's inexperienced mind, and unsure of how long he'd been following the forest path, he decided to turn back the way he'd come. But when someone touched him on the shoulder, causing him to spin on his heels, his mother's words of warning flashed across his mind. "Come with me," said the man. He had a dreamlike aura about him, as though no matter or creature could ever cause him distress or harm. His voice had a sing-song quality, and the slingshot hanging from his belt looked as though it had never been used. "You'll be safe. Don't worry," he said, his brown eyes casting a swathe of warmth over Doran, immediately dispelling the shock of his presence moments before. "My name is Noddins. Here, let me take your sheep for you," and he reached for the sheep's rope. Doran hesitated. He could think of no reason why he shouldn't go with the man, but his mother's words returned for a fleeting second, and instinctively he tightened his grip. He looked at the man. Words would not come to him. His mind was a void, and something in Noddin's eyes made him release the rope. The sheep bleated softly, and the stranger motioned them on through the forest. The earthy smells and sounds of the dense woodlands filled Doran's senses as he followed Noddins, who strode with ease along the trail, brushing overhanging brambles and tree limbs to the side, holding them back so they could pass through. "Don't worry," he said again, as he turned to Doran. "It's not far now. I'll take you to a place where you can rest." Still, Doran had no words, trying to anticipate what would happen next. Confusion mingled with a strange sense of calm as he glanced around at his unfamiliar surroundings, unsure of the direction in which he was being taken, and still questioning whether he should turn back with the remaining sheep. But now the trees all looked the same, and the path was crisscrossed with others, all clarity of purpose and direction gone. Doran hesitated, but Noddins turned back and smiled. "You're not the first to wander this way," he said, and Doran felt his feet resume their movement, following the man through the trees as they became thicker, older, their ancient trunks twisted and knotted, full of secrets and memories. Then, gradually the trees started to thin out, and a soft glow began to seep through the forest canopy ahead. The whispers that had followed Doran since he entered the woods grew louder, becoming more like human words and voices. "Noddins, we wondered where you were." A woman with dark flowing hair carrying a basket of blackberries rushed along the path towards them. She faltered when she saw Doran. "Rowena, don't fret," said Noddin, noticing her startled expression. "I found this lost soul in the forest in search of one of his sheep. I believe it may be here already." "Of course," said Rowena, her face relaxing. Then she looked at Doran with an expression that seemed familiar, but he couldn't place. "What's your name?" Doran was about to answer when something moved into his mouth and held his tongue fast so it wouldn't move. His mind searched. In the dark cells and matter, he grasped to find it, but the word ran from him, escaping into the nooks and small spaces. He stood dumbfounded then. It snapped back for a fleeting moment, and he snatched it before it escaped him again. "Doran," he said, and then again, "Doran, my name is Doran." They followed Rowena a little further into a wide clearing, where the light from the sky cast a soft glow over strange flowers and other peculiar botanicals that swayed gently as though caught in an imaginary breeze. Among the plants and flowers were people, dozens of them, going about their business or sitting in small groups. A man who sat carving a piece of wood turned as Doran approached and smiled. The same disarming smile as Nodden's, settling the sense of unease that kept washing back and forth over Doran. Doran and Nodden sat on a low bench outside a small wooden building, as they watched the people coming and going. It struck Doran that some of them looked a little familiar, yet they seemed strange, as though he had seen them in a dream he couldn't quite remember. "Who are all these people?" he asked. Noddens turned to him with a wistful smile, as though contemplating faraway thoughts. "They're all like you, Doran," he said as Rowena came out of the building and handed them both a carved wooden cup of ale. "They wandered into this place, and now they belong here, as do you." Doran felt something in the very depth of his stomach turn and rise in his chest, something disturbing and unfathomable. "No, you've got it wrong," he said, panic rising. "I just came to find my—" He stopped. "What was it I was looking for? I was going somewhere." Doran tried to retrieve the morning's events from his memory, but instead of words and images, all he could find were empty pages, fluttering in the breeze, attached to nothing. "I don't understand," he said, but before Noddens could respond, a woman with a fearful look in her eyes approached them, her pace urgent. She reached out and grabbed Doran's arm. "Do you remember me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No, I don't think so." Doran looked at the woman as her face crumpled with disappointment, but she didn't let go. "I thought you might," she said, her eyes wide. "I was from somewhere once. Before." She trailed off, then released her grasp, turned and hastened away again. "Don't worry about Flora," said Nodens as he rose from his seat. "She hasn't quite completed her adaptation. It will become easier for her soon, once the forest has taken all that it needs. And then she will remember nothing of her old life." He smiled as his hand ran over the bark of a small sapling. "It'll leave you to rest a while, and don't worry about your sheep." A wave of scattered memory flooded over Doran for a few fleeting seconds, enough for him to again recall his mother's words, and his heart pounded as he looked around at the people in the clearing. "The forest has taken their memories," he whispered to himself, unaware that Rowena was still close enough to hear. Her voice took him by surprise as she spoke. "The forest takes more than your memories. It takes your name, your past, your place in the world." She sat down next to Doran. "Those who enter this place do not only give their own memories to the forest, but they are also erased from the memories of those who knew them on the outside." "But—" Doran stammered, his own memories escaping his reach again. "Why do you stay? Why don't you just leave?" "Why would we leave?" Rowena glanced up at the canopy above, as though it might be listening. "The forest provides for us. It gives us new names, new purpose, warmth and sanctuary. We want for nothing here. I have no recollection of my life or my name before I came here. The forest named me Flora. It will name you too. It will name you very soon." Terrified at the thought of his memories being erased, of being forgotten by all those he knew and loved, Doran leapt to his feet, the ale cup tumbling to the ground. No longer fearful of the consequences of losing the sheep, there was now more at stake, his very existence, his place. And then all reason escaped him again. But the rising terror propelled him onwards, and he ran from the clearing, back along the twisting path that had brought him there. Rowena watched as he disappeared into the trees, and the corners of her mouth twitched. Doran stopped, bending at his knees, gasping for breath, pain in his side. He felt he'd been running forever, but he didn't know why. He sat at the foot of a tall beech tree, the ground below soft with layers of husks. To his left lay one path, to his right another, and he no longer knew if the route ahead was the way he'd come or the direction he was going. Around him the forest whispered and sighed, faint melodies twisted through the branches, and the plants and flowers around him pulsed with a mysterious energy. Doran knew he had to be somewhere, but he no longer knew where. He knew he had to run, but he didn't know why. He held his head in his hands as the madness of it all took hold of him with overwhelming force. The parts of his mind that had once fit together, making perfect sense, were falling away, becoming more and more impossible to put back together, missing, upside down, broke. Doran sobbed as fleeting images of his mother, their home in the village, and his father's pride flickered and vanished. With a sorrowful moan, Doran wiped the tears from his face. His trembling hands pulled a knife from his satchel, and using the last part of whatever remained, he carved the final scraps of his memory into the tree's knotted bark, each cut of the blade an attempt to save himself, fighting desperately to recall each letter. Doran he finally scratched, though its meaning faded in its completion, and then, under the weight of pure misery and helplessness, he collapsed heavily to the ground and fell into a dreamless sleep. The boy who was once named Doran was woken by the gentle lights of Nodden's and Rowena's lanterns. As they looked down on him at the foot of the beech tree, they roused the boy gently and led him through the trees. And as the boy walked with them, the last pieces of identity evaporated into the dense thickness of the forest, and everything that had once been Doran became an unremembered memory, sinking into the roots of the plants and trees. The trio arrived at a small dwelling where Rowena washed and fed the boy who had once been Doran and settled him into a soft bed by a warm fire. As the boy's mind stilled, Noddens and Rowena sang, haunting melodies and songs, ancient words of the forest, absorbing memories and identities to feed itself and thrive, deep within the ever-present spirit of the trees, wrapping itself around every part of the boy, until once again he began to slumber, a sleep that took him to the heart of the forest, where plants and flowers caressed him. In a village, a morning's walk from the forest, a man and woman stood in their small home, discussing the mysterious disappearance of 2 sheep the day before. Neither they nor their neighbors had any idea what might have happened to the missing creatures, and although loss of livestock was always felt keenly, this time something unsettled them more than it usually would. The woman glanced at the small bed tucked into the corner of the room, still freshly made. Creases formed across her brow as she tried to recall something, but the thought slipped out of reach before she could grasp it. The man, still pondering the missing sheep, noticed her confused expression and asked what was wrong, but the woman could not say. She had no words and simply shook her head. Some miles away, deep within the ancient forest, sunlight touched the leaves of the dense canopy, and a gentle wind rustled through the trees, casting fleeting patches of light on the bark of an old beech tree. No trace remained of the single word, once carved by a terrified hand, and lichen and moss now thrived where the name had once been, consumed by the forest, every last part of it gone. I felt my grief hot and clawing in my chest as I watched the ambient dust of the attic filter through the air. The attic, which I now called my own, as well as the house it was attached to, and all within its walls. The only light within the long room shone from a single bulb on the ceiling, keeping the far corners in shadow, and highlighting the skeleton of the house, rafters and beams caked in dust and cobwebs. The detritus of generations littered the floor, unwanted bureaus and chairs, trunks of now antique clothing. The smell of the place was comforting, somehow familiar. That cannot be possible, I thought. I was never allowed in the attic. Perhaps that is why I found myself there in the first place. Weary of the familiar sights below stairs and the agony of tears usually summoned by the memories of my father. This family has always been cursed, slithered its way through my mind. Even in the old world, as grandfather insisted on calling our origins when he was alive, the family had suffered more misfortune, more death than their neighbors. The family tree twined through history, black crape draping its many branches. Despite the constant presence of death, life persisted, at least to the point where one day I was born, Isabella, the last of the Albescues, though no one knew it then. I roamed morosely through the attic, trailing my fingers over the tarnished things of my family, old and heavy with the weight of time, trying desperately to feel connected to the past. What was all the suffering for? I wondered. The problem with our things, the stuff that makes humans human, remaining after our demise, is that they are inanimate, impersonal reminders of the monotony of lives lived. A life seems very short and purposeless when viewed from a distance. So mine would be. Suddenly, I wanted to be under the trees, the sky, anywhere but trapped between the groaning beams above and the yawning expanse of house below. Maybe it should have all burned with them, incinerated into ashes. Had I said that out loud? I was turning to depart, disturbed, when I caught sight of something curious. The dust furring the top of a ponderous trunk appeared to have been recently disturbed, as if by hands opening the lid. At least more recently than I could guess, as I lacked the powers to determine how long it took dust to settle up here, one mote drifting to land on a surface at a time. Perhaps it was Father, I thought with a pang. I imagined myself following his steps as I moved toward the trunk and knelt before it, touching the touched places almost reverentially. I could hear nothing but my own quickened breath and the soft moan of the wind outside, ever caressing the eaves of this house. The trunk was made of a sturdy, dark wood, edged with carvings I couldn't quite make out under the layers of age and grime. It was massive. How many did it take to heft it up those stairs so long ago? The lid groaned in protest as I prized it open, the wood warped and swollen with damp. I was hit with the scent of salt water and something else I couldn't place. Something earthy, ancient, persisting. Layers of burgundy velvet greeted my eyes. These appeared to have once been used as a magnificent bed curtain. I ran my hands through the sumptuous fabric, soft and supple from use, and my fingers brushed against something hard and cool, almost causing me to recoil in disgust. Then I caught myself. It was only a chest, tucked, hidden, within the velvety folds. It was quite a bit smaller than the trunk which contained it, 3 feet long and 2 wide, about tall enough to reach my knee, I guessed. I pulled the curtains from the trunk, spilling them about my legs, trying to get a better look at the chest in the dim light. Inlays of gold and rubies swirled over its surface in patterns strange but alluring, and 4 golden handles adorned each side. A prominent lock sealed it shut. Using every bit of strength I called my own, I heaved on the handles, attempting to remove the chest from where it had rested for years beyond my knowledge. But my strength failed. It would not budge. I retreated back downstairs in defeat, my thoughts consumed by the chest. Where had it come from, and what was concealed inside? Why had it apparently been visited, and where was the key? I also wondered about the hold it had over me, and the inexplicable urge to go look upon it once more, to open it and release. Release what? My mind was confused and muddled. That night my dreams were full of terror, but when I woke I could remember nothing of them but was possessed by an unnameable dread, and an almost insatiable thirst to open the chest. I had been putting off settling matters with Father's lawyer, but now I could wait no longer. I phoned him and asked if he was left any keys or other such objects in his keeping, to which he replied that he had a packet from my father, and plenty of papers needing my signature. By the time I returned home, darkness was creeping into the daylight. The packet came out of my coat pocket, and I once again fixated on the scribbling of ink on top of the brown paper. My name in my father's handwriting. I tore it open in the semi-darkness, coat and hat still on. At the first glint of metal, my breath stilled. The key. I don't know how I intuited it was the one I desired, or the way it would slide into the lock of the chest that had dominated my mind all night and day, gliding in like it had been recently oiled, cared for. But so it did, and when I turned the key, I was met with a satisfying click that thrilled my nerves. There was a moment, as I kneeled on the floor of the attic, when my previous fancy returned to me. It should have all burned with them. In my heart, I knew that was as it should be, but I had to open the chest, and now I rued the day I was compelled beyond my will by the demon inside, that I was so weak and susceptible to its radiating force. For when I lifted the lid, I was brought face to face with the horror inside, the horror that I had only expected, with a bowel-quivering mixture of anticipation and fear. A most unnatural creature reclined in the chest, and its glittering black eyes were upon mine, and within those inky pools I saw my ancestors, receding into the far distance of time, always suffering, and always caring for this thing, feeding it, passing the gilt chest down to the next generation of Albescus, as if it were a treasured heirloom and not a curse, an obsession that could never be satisfied. Already I felt it, the need to further the creature's survival, enthralled by its unwavering gaze. I lifted the creature into my arms, and it wasn't much bigger than a child of 3, and somehow it almost resembled a child half-human, half-chiroptera, leathery and shriveled. Its face was more like a fungus, soft and folded and moist. I lifted it to my breast and felt pressure, and then the pop as its suckling mouth latched onto the hollow of my throat, and its teeth sunk deep into my vein. And then I was nothing, felt nothing but the heady rush of my exsanguination, my blood flowing from my body into the one who must live at all costs. When the sun comes, I have moments of clarity, seeing beyond the near constant muddiness of my mind, and I know I am in its thrall, and that is why I do the unspeakable things it requires of me. Why I eagerly lap up the blood regurgitated from its foul mouth when it returns in the night to feed me. It is the only thing that sustains me now, in this horrible hell in which I live. These are the moments when I am shaken with despair and regret. When I have the presence of mind to remember that night I staggered down from the attic after my first meeting with my new master, shaken and disoriented, and my eyes fell on the remains of the packet my father had left me, which I had forgotten in my haste to open the chest. Lying there was his note from my father reading, "For the love of all that is holy, never use this key. It dies with me. Died." Why didn't he throw the key into the sea, bury it where it could never be found? I ask, yet I know the answer, because I too have felt the needles in my neck, and know that while my longing to destroy my master is strong, my drive to shield it from destruction is stronger yet. As long as I live, I will guard and obey my master, but after that, I am the sole remaining Albescu, that tormented line devoted to this fiend, forever aiding and sating its never-ending appetite. When I finally succumb to the siren of the grave, there will be none to prevent it from being unleashed upon the world, servantless and ravenous, seeking the next one to curse. Who will it be? The wolves howled, and the ravens croaked, as a woman lay dying in the midnight forest. Serena pressed a hand to her belly as she collapsed, the blood a pleasant contrast to her cold fingers. The knife wound to her abdomen was quick and precise, the mark of a skilled assassin. She felt the frozen earth below her, a bed of soft pine needles cushioning her body in its final resting place. The pain blurred her vision, but there was one thing she was able to pull into her awareness in her last moments. Aurora, her greatest source of warmth and light, was at her side. "Don't leave me," Aurora sobbed. "Please, Serena. You have to stay with me." Serena feebly lifted a hand to Aurora's face to wipe the tears off her cheek before the icy wind chapped her skin. "Don't forget me, Aurora," Serena whispered. "No, never," Aurora said, tugging on Serena's green scarf. "I love you, Serena. I'm not going to forget you because you're not going anywhere. You're going to make it out of this." She released the scarf and attempted to press her cloak into Serena's wound to stop the bleeding, but it made little difference. Serena could feel her blood begin to pool around her. "I don't think I am." She found Aurora's hand and laced their fingers together. "Promise me, Aurora. Promise me that you won't forget me." "I won't," Aurora whispered, her voice cracking. "We're going to get you to a healer," she said, tears flowing down her cheeks. "They'll fix you right up." "You have to get out of here," Serena said as a wolf howled, sounding much closer than it had been before. "Get to the nearest village. These woods aren't safe alone." "I won't leave you," Aurora said. "I can't." Serena knew she was going to depart well before Aurora would abandon her body. Her golden thread of fate was poised to be cut at any moment. "Remember me," Serena whispered with her last remaining strength. "I love you, Aurora." And then she was gone. A pair of amber eyes watched a grief-stricken young woman pull a green scarf off a corpse lying on the ground and wrap it around her own neck. The scent of fresh blood, a tantalizing treat in the middle of winter, had drawn the pack to the scene. The wolf thought briefly about killing the second human as she shouldered a traveler's pack too heavy for her, her bow and quiver clutched in her shaking hand. But the wolf was tired, exhausted from hunting all day with no success. It would be too much trouble to kill her, and though she was over-encumbered, the wolf had seen how the human used her weapon to wound the assassin. The rest of the wolf pack had already found him stumbling off into the dark with a gouged leg. 2 bodies was a feast. The wolf decided to let the loud, crying one go. When the clearing had returned to silence, the wolf stalked towards the body in the pine needles. The metallic, rich scent of blood made it salivate. It imagined the thick muscles and pockets of fat that lined the corpse's bones. Humans seemed to eat far better than deer and rabbits in winter. The wolf smelled that the human had recently consumed a meal. It began to tear through the clothes dressing the body, ripping away the thick cloak that kept the human warm in the frost. The wolf thought it strange that the hairless humans wore sheep's wool. What it would give to find a pasture of unguarded sheep this time of year. But for tonight it was grateful for its feast of human flesh. The meat was delicious, still warm and utterly delightful. The human's organs were particularly good, rich with nutrients the wolf needed to sustain itself until the spring. It tore the body apart, ripping limbs from the corpse and gnawing on the bones. It heard the rest of the pack approach after they finished off the wounded assassin, curious about a second course. The wolf happily shared the bounty with them, all of their muzzles shining ruby red in the moonlight. When it had finally eaten its fill, the wolf took a large piece of the human's leg in its mouth and set off through the forest. Following the winding trail through the brush back to its den, the wolf swelled with pride for the bounty it was bringing home. It thought about the 4 little mouths lingering in their winter hideaway, waiting for their mother to bring them their next meal. The wolf had so feared her children going hungry, and was relieved to provide them with such a thick slab of meat and bone. She laid their dinner in front of them, happy to see her young ones enjoying their feast. She plopped down beside them, crossing her front paws over one another in contentment. The stroke of luck she'd had tonight, she thought to herself, was something she would remember. Her cubs, having gone a full week without food, would certainly remember too. Willie. A murder of ravens appeared in the pine trees shortly after the human's body hit the ground, summoned by a notification from the wolves that a forest feast was to be held under the moonlight. The birds waited patiently for the wolves to have their fill, the two clans in agreement to share the meal in an orderly fashion. They croaked and cawed in celebration, finding this occasion particularly auspicious. When the wolves finally melted back into the forest, the ravens descended, continuing to rip apart the corpse and scatter the bones, bits of bloodied cloth, and human entrails around the clearing. They were the last creatures to see the body before it would be swallowed back into the earth. As her final companions, they ushered the dead woman onto her next life, preparing the lingering remnants of her flesh for the moss and mushrooms, eager for their own feast. There was nothing richer than blood to make the forest floor erupt in strength and vitality the following spring. The ravens were proud of their role in the cycle, leaving nothing but stark white bones glittering like streaks of stardust on the dark forest floor. But then something caught the eye of one of the ravens. A shiny man-made object lying in the dirt where the woman's hand had once been. It was a silver ring embedded with a tiny emerald. It had been many moons since the bird had seen such a beautiful prize, and it quickly picked up the treasure and flew into a tree before the others could see the trinket. The raven set the ring on the branch to examine it, placing its little taloned foot over the jewelry to prevent it from falling. The bird pecked at the ring, noticing that it was well made and of a much higher quality than the other lost items it had found. Deciding to keep it, the raven picked up its prize and brought the ring to the spot where it stored all of its other goodies. It didn't want the other ravens to become jealous and try to steal the ring. Best to keep this one a secret, it thought. The ring was too special, too cherished to risk losing. The raven located its hidey hole full of shiny baubles and found treasures and stashed the emerald ring. The bird was quite full from its feast in the forest and settled down in its nest for some sleep. What a night, it thought to itself. Whoever that dead human had been, the raven hoped she had a peaceful journey from this life into the next. The bird felt gratitude for the woman, not only for the flesh that had nourished it, but also the prized piece of jewelry now in its collection. The raven would remember her for these gifts. "I won't forget you," Aurora whispered to herself, wrapping Serena's green scarf tighter around her neck. The scarf had still been warm when she pulled it off Serena's body, and she decided that if she never took it off and continued to keep it warm, it would be like Serena was still there. That was until she found a way to bring her wife back from the dead. The next morning she set out from the village after buying a roan mare, embarking on a quest to find someone who could resurrect Serena. She was deeply saddened that she hadn't retrieved Serena's wedding band before surrendering her body to the wildlife. Perhaps, she thought, someone would find the ring, and it would somehow make its way back to her. And even if it didn't, she hoped the new owner would cherish it as much as Serena had. She could not bring herself to go back to the scene of Serena's death to look for it. She wondered what had happened to Serena's body after she left it in the forest. Surely the wolves had descended and ripped her wife to shreds, followed by the ravens. It didn't matter now. She was determined to keep Serena's memory alive until she could be brought back from the dead. Even if no one else remembered Serena, she would. Even if the wolves didn't care who they ate, nor the ravens who they scavenged, she cared. Though the forest had feasted on Serena's remains, she was not gone. And she was not forgotten.